This is the fifth estate winning headlines, your media police post, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya, from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at some of the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 12th of June 2020, and I am 2M.
I am 2J.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, budget for bad times. In the Standard, a budget to the rescue. And in the Star, COVID budget, Yatani targets jobs, youth. But before we begin, happy birthday, TJ.
Happy birthday, 2J.
To our favorite June baby.
Thank you, guys.
And let us do the headlines together, because they're all speaking about the budget.
The budget, yes.
I hear 2J is turning 16.
Happy 16.
2M, if I'm turning 60, how old are you?
16, I meant.
Well, listen, I sympathized with Yatani yesterday. He's essentially 2M, focus. He's essentially reading a budget in a time that isn't so great. He's trying to balance the needs of the citizens and the government and the economy, and it's traditional things won't do. However, we can see that there were good beneficiaries, a good number of beneficiaries in the budget. We know that education, for one, got a lion's share of the budget, 26.7, with 497.7 billion. We know that transport also came up high with 172 billion, in which they're going to focus on construction and rehabilitation of works. And then you have phase 2 of SGR, you have Lapset, Mombasa Port being revitalized, you have all those things. But you also have security getting a huge lion's share of the budget with 167.9 billion. That's to army, prisons, the national intelligence, and then you have health with 111.7 billion. The big losers, guys, digital economy. What's happening? So
I would not call the digital economy a loser. Because if anything, for me, this new budget has shown us where the money is moving. A lot of people under lockdown are staying at home. They have nothing to do. Kenyans, as we know, are spending more money on alcohol, more money on cigarettes, more money on like digital items, your Facebook, your Netflixes, all of those things. And so what is the government to do? If you're not spending your money in the economy, out in the public, you're spending it at home. And so for them, we have to target that attention in that direction.
I felt like they were looking for money behind the sofa. Like, this is like
your coins.
You're looking for the little coins, because we know that Kenyans are going through a tough time. People are working from home. Do you then want to tax the very things that are giving them reprieve at that time?
Fantastic points. But I think this was a perfect balancing act by Ukuri Yatani. And the reason I say this is because of this. You see, last time our budget was what? 3.02 trillion shillings?
Last year, 2019.
And now it's 2.79 trillion shillings.
So we've had a deduction.
We have a deduction. And that's because it's business unusual for us. And look, I mean, I agree with 2J. When you say that you're going to tax digital, that whatever tax that for digital thing is, it's because that's where the money, that's where the pool of money is. But I also want to say that this budget was aimed mostly to the youth.
To the youth,
yes.
To the women. You have Kazim Tani.
Over 200,000 youth. You have about 10 billion shillings being disbursed every single year. About 1 billion shillings being disbursed every single month to youths. I was speaking to someone the other day, they were telling me I received 1,000 bob, and it's like 1 week. And 150 million shillings to women for a women fund. About 17 billion shillings for youth empowerment fund. You can tell that this is focused. And let me tell you, 10 years ago, we were in this situation. What caused it was post-election violence. The man that read the budget then was Uhuru Kenyatta, and he came up with a stimulus package of 22 billion shillings. Then, just before that year, financial year, our GDP hit about 2.8%?
Growth,
Now, after in 2010, the GDP hit 8%. And that was primarily because of that stimulus package. This is exactly what's going to happen.
Yes, and we hope that's the intention, because you have 3 billion that they've relinquished for seed capital for SMEs.
Absolutely.
You have that 10 billion you've just mentioned for the youth, and a bunch of other things that budget, the money goes to where it's needed the most. And we're hoping then it will stimulate a sluggish economy.
And 2M, in the way that you're talking about how what Uhuru Kenyatta did 1 year that then you saw the benefits of it years later.
Precisely.
I think Kenyans need to put that into context. Yes, we're in a tough moment. We understand that. But the benefits of what this budget is saying today, we're going to reap those benefits in years to come. And I think that's the important thing. We have to think forward.
Absolutely.
Think about legacy.
You know, I watched him speak, and the beauty about this country, guys, is we have a diversified economy. Countries like Angola, Nigeria, South Africa are actually receding back because they rely much on what? Minerals,
on oil, on alcohol, wine, all those,
on that kind of stuff. We are so diversified that we can actually be so resilient to survive these times. And I think it's time we support initiatives instead of all the time criticizing.
Fantastic. And he's put in, you know, some of the losers as well is those who import from abroad. And I think they're just trying to promote the Build Kenya by Kenya thing. So who do we give it to? We have budget for bad times.
Throw.
We have a budget to the rescue.
Yeah.
Okay. It's your birthday. I'll throw that.
Yeah.
We have a budget to the rescue by standard. And we have COVID budget, Yatani targets jobs and youth.
I'm against calling it a COVID budget.
Yeah, I like the standard. It's a budget to the rescue. It speaks to what it is doing
in the moment.
So we had a 3-part criteria that we used. Yes, we had, because we picked to break down the headlines. We asked ourselves whether it was topical or speculative, whether it was repetitive or groundbreaking, and whether it was thoughtful or just plain lazy. And we arrived at the standard, giving us our winning headlines.
Absolutely.
Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria. We asked ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? Who should we begin with?
We begin with the nation. And who is that on a motorbike running? Oh, that's
a cop. Policeman.
It's a policeman. This,
and,
I think this has to do with that video. It's a policeman on a motorbike, and he is dragging the Constitution away.
Yeah.
And next to him is another cop, I believe.
Yeah, and the caption says Mtadu.
Mtadu.
Yeah.
Now, there's a video that's been circulating on social media of the most idiotic cop I've ever seen. He was dragging a lady on a motorbike, and that video is horrendous to watch. Sometimes I wonder what happens in these people's minds sometimes. I mean, whatever mistake she has done, just put her in a cell.
It doesn't warrant
you saw
abuse, embarrassment.
You saw an oath to protect the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution.
Yeah.
Just do the damn thing.
Yeah.
Put the lady in cell, and that's it. If she was a thief for whatever crime she committed. But you taking extra judicial means to punish a person is absolutely out of order. But I'm glad Matiang'i took charge, and this guy is inside cell, and I hope he rots inside there.
And that's the thing we were saying last week. The police is a service. It's not supposed to be this brutal, forceful thing, you know.
Yeah.
So do we pack it for giving good commentary?
Yeah, it is a good commentary, definitely.
Okay. Let us move to the standard, in which Kaso has drawn for us Ukur Yatani in a waiter's outfit. And he, on one side, you see the budget, and the budget is a big guy eating up all the lovely food and drink. What a buffet. But on the other side is Yatani handing the bill from the budget guys to the taxpayers, and the taxpayer looks really hungry and famished, and his table is not as lovely as the other one.
Yeah.
But
guys, you know what this reminded me of? How often have we said, and the budget linked me to the Constitution. As Prof always says, this Constitution that we signed was an invoice to Kenyans.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I think it goes back then to the idea of BBI. We need to reform the way in which this Constitution is like linking us and is really dragging us down.
Yeah.
So...
And I think the economy is going through a supply side crisis. You know, businesses are shutting down. Kenyans want to spend, but they don't have the opportunities in which to spend. So revenues are shrinking all round. But
see, Kaso, and this must be said to journalists out and cartoonists out there. I think we're in a moment of recession, and I mean, nobody wanted this. The government does not want to finger its people because, you know, every country is going through hard times, and this is because of this corona thing from China. But also another thing, this is expected. The person who feeds the budget is a taxpayer.
Exactly.
So what is he telling us?
So do we park it or leave it or toss it?
I think we toss it.
Okay, toss the standard.
Yes.
Let's move to the star. In the Star, we have a caricature of Ukur Yatani.
Yeah.
And he's holding up a briefcase that's see-through or is magnified.
Yeah.
And with it, you can see a balancing scale. On one side, you have coronavirus in green. And then on the other side, you have the coins. And then it says budget balancing. I think it just speaks to the commentary of what we've talked about with the headlines.
That balancing act.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act.
You know?
However, I don't know if I understand this cartoon.
You never understand Ozon's cartoons.
Wait, today's her birthday.
But today's your birthday, it would be nice. But I do like it because that is exactly what he had to do. We have a pandemic and we have a budget that we
How do you balance those two things?
Can we give the Star a winning cartoon?
Yes, Tujay? Tujay, say yes.
And today, the winning cartoon goes to Ozone of the Star.
Hey, thank you. And what is our final thought?
And now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Actionable, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. What a name.
What a name indeed. Before you go ahead, may I give a summary?
Oh, yes.
So this week we looked at how to understand crises that happen in our lives and in the world. On Monday, we looked at Upheaval, Turning Points for Nations in Crisis by Jared Diamond. Here, Diamond reveals how successful nations recover from crises while adopting selective changes.
Yeah.
And these are a coping mechanism that is associated with people recovering from personal crises. A system of identifying and isolating problems and then learning from history to help governments make better decisions. On Tuesday, we looked at The Information, A History, a Theory, a Flood by James Gleick, who showed us how information has become the modern era's defining quality and how information technologies have changed the nature of human consciousness. Sorry.
You know you're from Central.
We saw the perils of information overload and the importance of search and filter as the volume of information and technologies increase in our world. On Wednesday, we looked at How to Be a Dictator, The Cult of Personality in the 20th Century by Frank Dicotta, where he examines the cults and propaganda surrounding dictators from Hitler and Stalin to Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung. And he provided a guide to the cult of personality and a map for exposing the lies dictators tell to build and maintain their regimes. On Thursday, we looked at why nations fail, the origins of power, prosperity, and poverty. And here the authors attempted to tell us why some nations are rich and others remain poor. They concluded that developed countries are wealthy because they created and have inclusive economic institutions, one in which the state creates incentives for people to innovate and invest. And today we're looking at angels and our inner demons.
Yes. So 2M, I'd like to propose a different title to the one that you said.
The correct one.
The correct one.
Okay,
Thank you, GK. So the title of today's book is inspired, or rather, today's inspired by The Better Angels of Our Nature. Why Violence Has Declined. 2M.
I don't really, it was your birthday.
That's a bad excuse. All right. Anyway, so Steven Pinker is a professor of psychology at the University of Harvard, or Harvard University, specializing in cognitive science. And he's done a lot of research about visual perception and the development and usage of language, especially in children. And so the title from this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, actually originates from the first inaugural speech that Abraham Lincoln gave back in many years ago. And that's opposed to the better angels of our nature. So that's talking about our nature as humans. Do we want to be angels? Do we want to be devils? And so, quite plain and simple, this book is about violence. And it paints a very remarkable picture about how the world has evolved over time to be far less violent than it was before. And for many people, this may be quite surprising, that we live in a world that is far less violent than it was, because we read and see so much about violence in the news and in the media. But Pinker suggests that it is our awareness and our sensitivity to violence that has increased, not the actual violence as it is. And he illustrates how we live in actually the most peaceful time in history by looking at what motivates us to be violent, how these motivators outweigh our tendencies to be peaceful, and what these major shifts in history have caused this global reduction in crime. And so he addresses some of these big questions. Are humans essentially good or bad? Has the past century witnessed a moral progress or a moral collapse? Do we have grounds for being optimistic about the future? And to explain why we have been on this continuous decline of violence in the past 5,000 years, he says. He looks at these three things. He says there are these 5 big motivators for violence. He says the 4 big angels of our nature that counteract these forces. And then he looks at these 6 major historical shifts that have allowed us to dominate over other people.
Right.
And so his argument is based on philosophy, the Enlightenment period that came after the French, or during the French Revolution rather, and democracy as being key drivers for the reduction of violence. And he says, for example, when archaeologists look at the ancient remains of people from back in the day, he says that a lot of them were clearly murdered. You see, like their skulls were crashed in.
Yes.
But he says as time went on, archaeologists found less and less evidence of these violent crimes. And he says that we began to move away from violence when we first settled down to this like stable agricultural economies. And after the Enlightenment period, governments themselves became less violent. They eliminated cruel punishments, and other things like religious crime kind of ended. But in my opinion, in this book, what I kind of gathered is that this guy is one step away of suggesting that the reason that Western governments have seen less violence is because African governments are lagging behind in governance. You know, he kind of suggests that we are a bit primitive, and that's why you see violence in Africa or in third world countries, but less so in Western communities. I agree with the book. I think that has a quite interesting concept. I just don't agree with how he frames it in terms of this Western
versus
ideal. Western versus African ideal. But interesting book nonetheless.
So I took away from it the angels that are women. And the lesson here is that a more feminized world is a more peaceful world.
Amen.
And so he tells us the story of a man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi. And so he's probably the world's luckiest or unluckiest man, I don't know, but he survived 2 atomic blasts. So he was first at Hiroshima, and he escaped that one. And then he went to live in Nagasaki, and then another bomb went off there, but he survived them. Anyway, he passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. But before he passed away, he gave an interview, and this is what he said. The only people who should be allowed to govern countries with nuclear weapons are mothers, those who are still breastfeeding their babies. And so according to Yamaguchi, he was essentially telling us that violence is mainly being committed by men. And
do you agree?
Absolutely not.
And he was, no, honestly, but he was invoking the most fundamental sort of generalization that violence is mainly committed by men. And if you go back in history, you see that men commit the lion's share of violence and crime. They take more delight in punishment and revenge. They take more foolish risks in aggressive attacks. They vote for more warlike policies and leaders, and plan and carry out genocides. I don't think I've heard of a woman carrying out
there's
genocide.
There's physical violence and mental violence.
But also from a young age, boys sort of consume a lot more aggressive, violent entertainment as well. And so the solution he suggests is actually quite reasonable. It might sound kind of sexist, but he's actually saying, you know what, it's probably true if we let women lead, life will be better. Now, let me give you an example. We've been going through the coronavirus pandemic, and women leaders have actually come out ahead. Allow me to make my case to him. If you look at Germany,
he's awfully quiet.
If you look at Germany, led by Angela Merkel, they have had far lower death rates than Britain, France, Italy, or Spain. And she adopted a very interesting, all-encompassing strategy. She considered a variety of different information sources, developing those in terms of developing her coronavirus policy. So she talked to epidemiologists. She looked at those models. She looked at medical providers. She took evidence from South Korea and saw what they were doing best, and then she adopted it. And overall, we saw that she had dramatically lower death rates than her European counterparts. Right? In Finland, you see Prime Minister Sanna Marin, who's only 34 years old, and she governs with a coalition of 4 female-led parties, and they had fewer than 10% as many deaths as their nearby neighbor Sweden. And then you have the president of Taiwan, a lady called Tsai Ing-wen, and she presided over one of the most successful efforts in the world in containing the virus. She did contact tracing, isolation, did really like a very thorough-going, comprehensive policy when it came to coronavirus.
No, I agree with you. When pandemic strikes, you give it to a lady. A lady will take care of you. Fantastic.
Don't say a lady.
A lady president.
No, not a lady.
But now you're saying you give nuclear codes to a lady. She will bomb another lady who's messing with her man.
But what I do like is the idea of feminization, and that means the process in which cultures have increasingly respected the interests and values of women, which I think should increase generally.
100%.
As much as I was doing this, I actually like what you said.
Okay, great.
So I focused on this is chapter 8, the chapter on inner demons, and I want to ask you, ladies, have you ever been so mad at someone that you want to kill them?
I plead the fifth.
Tujay?
I appreciate you most times, but I will not lie. There are moments where. ... But anyway,
what's your point?
What's your point?
So he says there are 3 main reasons why people are cruel to each other. And he says the one is competition, second is something called diffidence, and third is glory. And allow me to first dissect them. Competition. He says there are 2 factors of competition here. The first is the human being has this desire. It's an innate desire to be always on top. But second, see, our chances of survival, he says, that are increased when you have more resources, and when you have more resources, you can conquer. You feel more comfortable, and you feel like you can conquer more territories than if you do not have more resources. And he says that that this increases our ability to use violence in order to gain more resources, gain territory, and to command others. But second reason is diffidence. And he says that human beings are all about safety. That is why we live in gated communities, number one. That is why we all want secure jobs. But if someone messes with that comfort, then you have to strike back. You have to fight. Third, it's glory. He says the desire for glory, fame, brings out the worst in us, and we do this to feed our ego. I know a fellow in our political environment that does the same. I will not mention names.
Wow.
But there's something he says about competition that I feel like I have to read. He says competition breeds fear, which is true. If you have reason to suspect that your neighbor is inclined to eliminate you from the competition by killing you, then you'll be inclined to protect yourself by eliminating him first in a preemptive strike. What do we always say here? It's this thing that we always say. What does it say again?
I've remembered.
Do you?
Before they do you.
Do others before they do you.
No, it's from the Moy School of Politics, Moy Book of Politics. Do unto others
before they do unto you.
Before they do unto you.
Fantastic. So on a day where we had a winning headline from the Standard and a winning cartoon from the Star, allow me to leave you with some words from Thomas Hobbes. And I think it's what Tuem was sort of describing about striking back. It's called the Hobbesian trap. There are situations in life when, frightened by a probable threat, you want to attack first. And this paradox is what we call the Hobbesian trap. But striking first might lead to some complications like jail or social rejection or political oblivion. But to avoid such uncomfortable situations, do the following. Do not strike first. Be strong enough to survive the first strike, and then plan a possible avenge against your attacker or your enemy.
Wow.
So have a lovely weekend. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Time to Air, and so on.